In a world of perfect illusions, we search for the glitches that reveal the hidden truth behind the mask. Witness the raw, unfiltered moments where reality breaks and the real story begins to emerge. Subscribe today and help us uncover the secrets within the digital shadows.
The ink on the notary seal hadn't even dried when my father raised his glass and said the company was my brother's now. I was standing near the fireplace in my parents' living room, a glass of sparkling water in one hand and 5 years of my professional life in the other, and I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I didn't make a sound. I just watched my father's face glow with that particular pride he had always reserved exclusively for my brother Derek, that warm, unguarded smile I had been chasing my entire life and never once caught. And I thought about the SEC report sitting in a federal database with Derek's name on it, his name and mine as the reporting agent. There were 14 people in that room, my father's business partners, 2 attorneys from the family firm's outside counsel, Derek's girlfriend Vanessa, who had been carefully positioned next to my father for the last 8 months like a chess piece waiting for its moment. My mother, who was crying in the way she always cried when Derek was being celebrated, and me. The only person in that room who knew exactly what was about to happen to every single one of them. Before I tell you how I watched my brother accept a company he will never legally own, let me tell you who I am. My name is Claire. I'm 29 years old. My father built Hargrove Property Group from a single strip mall in Tulsa, Oklahoma, into a regional real estate development firm with a portfolio worth approximately $47 million. For the last 4 years, I have worked as a financial compliance officer at a securities law firm in Dallas. My job, in simple terms, is to find the places where money goes when it is not supposed to go. I find the gaps between what a company reports and what it actually does. I find the people who believe they are too careful to get caught, and I build the case that proves them wrong. I'm very good at my job. Derek is 34. He joined Hargrove Property Group 6 years ago with the title my father invented for him, Executive Vice President of Growth. What he actually did was attend client dinners, play golf with contractors, and sign his name to documents our father prepared. For 6 years, my father told every room he entered that Derek was the future of the company, that Derek had the instincts, that Derek understood people in a way that couldn't be taught. I heard this speech so many times I could deliver it myself. What Derek actually understood was leverage, not the business kind. 18 months ago, I was reviewing a routine disclosure package for one of our firm's unrelated clients when I noticed a pattern in a set of subcontractor invoices that reminded me of something I had seen before. Not in a client file, in my family's company records, which my father had shared with me 2 years earlier when he briefly considered bringing me into the firm before Derek talked him out of it. The pattern was simple if you knew what to look for. Inflated invoices from shell companies. Payments routed through a management fee structure that obscured the true recipients. It is a technique that appears legitimate on the surface until you map the beneficial ownership of the receiving entities and realize they all trace back to the same person. They all traced back to the same person. He had been siphoning money from Hargrove Property Group for at least 3 years, not recklessly, carefully. In amounts that stayed below individual reporting thresholds, in structures that would pass a casual audit. But I am not a casual auditor. I sat with what I found for 2 weeks. I want to be honest about that. I didn't immediately pick up the phone. I sat with it because Derek is my brother, and because my father loves him in the way some fathers love certain children, completely and without condition, and I knew that what I was holding would end something that could not be unended. I thought about calling Derek directly. I thought about confronting him privately, giving him the chance to confess to our father himself and return what he had taken. Then I thought about the summer I turned 17, when I won a full academic scholarship to the University of Texas, and my father's response was to ask whether I had applied anywhere closer to home so I could help out at the office. He didn't come to my graduation. Derek had a golf tournament that weekend, and my father went to watch. I filed the report on a Tuesday morning in March. The SEC doesn't move quickly. That's the thing most people don't understand about financial investigations. There is no dramatic raid, no flashing lights, no handcuffs on a Tuesday afternoon. There is a quiet, methodical accumulation of documentation that happens over months while the subject of the investigation goes about their life completely unaware that the ground beneath them is being carefully excavated. For 18 months, I watched Derek come to Sunday dinners and talk about the company's expansion plans and accept my father's praise, and I said nothing. I smiled, I passed the bread, I asked polite questions about the project in Broken Arrow. I also spent those 18 months doing something else. 4 years ago, when my father briefly considered bringing me into Hargrove Property Group, he had our family attorney draft a preliminary shareholder agreement that was never executed. I still had a copy. More importantly, when I declined the offer, my father, in a gesture I believe he intended as a consolation, transferred a small parcel of undeveloped land in my name. He said it was so I would always have something from the company. He said it as though he was giving me a participation trophy. That parcel sat adjacent to Hargrove Property Group's largest active development site. Over the past 14 months, working with my own attorney and a commercial real estate specialist I trusted completely, I had quietly acquired 3 additional parcels surrounding that site through a blind trust. The trust's manager of record was my attorney. My name appeared nowhere in the public filings. Without those parcels, the development site could not be permitted for the mixed-use expansion my father had announced to his investors 6 months ago. Without that expansion, the company's projected valuation collapsed by approximately 60%. I want to be precise here because precision matters. I did not steal anything. I did not forge anything. I did not use any information I was not legally entitled to possess. I used my own money, my own expertise, and my own legal rights to position myself in a way that my father had never bothered to consider because it had never occurred to him that I was paying attention. That was his first mistake. The evening my father announced the transfer, I had been in Dallas when he called to invite me. He said he wanted the family together for something important. He said Derek had been working on something special. He used the word legacy twice in a 90-second phone call, and when he said it, his voice had that particular weight that told me the decision had already been made and the invitation was ceremonial. I drove 4 hours to be there. The outside counsel had prepared a clean transfer agreement. My father's signature was already on it. Derek sat at the head of the table my father had always occupied, and he looked like a man who had been waiting his entire life for a door to open and had just heard the latch click. Vanessa stood close enough to be photographed next to him. She had started dating Derek 11 months ago, approximately 3 months after I filed my report. I had done some reading on Vanessa. She held a real estate license that had been suspended once for a disclosure violation. She had been a named party in a civil suit involving a short-term rental scheme in Scottsdale. She was not stupid. She was, in fact, quite strategic. The timing of her arrival in Derek's life was the kind of coincidence that stopped being a coincidence when you looked at it long enough. My father finished his speech. The room applauded. Derek shook hands. Vanessa touched his arm and smiled at my mother in the careful way of a woman who has already decided where she will put the furniture. My father looked at me across the room, and his expression shifted, just slightly. He had expected something from me, tears maybe, or the particular tight smile of a person being gracious about their own loss. What he saw instead was nothing. A neutral face. A woman watching a process complete itself. He didn't know what to do with that, so he looked away. Derek signed the transfer agreement. I finished my sparkling water. My father found me in the kitchen 20 minutes later. He had the body language of the man who had prepared a speech but wasn't sure he needed it anymore. He leaned against the counter and crossed his arms and told me he hoped I understood. He said the company needed someone who had been embedded in it, someone who knew the operations from the inside. He said Derek had put in the years. He said I had my career, I had my independence, I had everything I needed. He said, "You've always been the one who didn't need things, Claire." I looked at him for a moment. He wasn't wrong about the last part. "I understand completely," I said. "I actually wanted to talk to you about the Riverside expansion." He relaxed slightly. Business, he understood. Business was comfortable ground. "The permit applications," I said. "Has Derek reviewed the parcel adjacency requirements for the eastern boundary?" My father frowned. "The adjacency for the eastern lots was resolved last year. We own everything we need." "You own the lots you purchased," I said. "But the expansion footprint extends onto 3 parcels on the eastern edge that aren't in the company's portfolio. I've been watching the title history on those parcels for a while. They transferred about 14 months ago." His frown deepened. "To who?" "A blind trust," I said. "The manager of record is an attorney named Philip Garrett. He's based in Austin." My father's face did the thing faces do when the ground shifts beneath them, but the person doesn't know yet how far they are going to fall. A small tightening around the eyes, a recalibration happening somewhere behind the expression. "I don't know that name," he said. "Philip is my attorney," I said. "He manages the trust on my behalf." The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. The sound of the party in the other room seemed to come from a great distance. "What are you saying?" my father said, and his voice was not angry yet. It was the voice of a man trying to find a foothold. I'm saying that the Riverside expansion, as currently permitted and as announced to your investors, cannot proceed without access to those parcels, I said. And those parcels belong to me, Claire. His voice sharpened. That is your family's company. If you are sitting on land that I purchased legally, I said, with my own money, through a process that is fully documented and entirely above board. Dad, I'm not the one you need to be concerned about right now. He stared at me. I could see him trying to find the version of this conversation where I was being unreasonable, where he could frame what I had done as the irrational act of a difficult daughter, and I could see him failing to locate it. What do you mean? He said. I set my glass on the counter. How long has Derek been working with the subcontractor entities you use on the Eastern Corridor projects, the ones registered in Nevada? His expression changed again. This time it was different, slower, more careful. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. I think you might, eventually, I said. I think the SEC will help you understand it when they reach out. They've been building their file for about a year and a half. They're very thorough. The color in my father's face shifted in the way that only happens when something has struck the deepest possible nerve. Not anger, not denial. Something more fundamental. The beginning of a reckoning. How do you know that? He said. Because I filed the initial report, I said simply. Dad, Derek has been stealing from this company for at least 3 years. I found the structures, I documented them. I reported them because it was the right thing to do and also because it was my legal obligation as a licensed compliance professional. I paused. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. I couldn't compromise the investigation. He looked at me the way people look at someone they have fundamentally misjudged but had not yet found the language to acknowledge it. Derek appeared in the kitchen doorway. He had the ease of a man who has just signed the documents he has been engineering toward for years, a man who believes the hard work is behind him. He looked between our father and me and read the room the way someone reads a room when they don't actually understand what they're seeing. Everything all right? He said. Derek, my father said, and there was something in his voice I had never heard before, a flatness that had no warmth in it at all. I was just explaining something to Dad, I said, about the Riverside expansion, and a few other things. Derek looked at me. He had always looked at me with a particular brand of unconcerned dismissal, the way certain people look at the furniture. He was starting to look at me differently now, not with respect, with the careful attention of a person who has just noticed something they should have noticed much earlier. What few other things? He said. The Nevada entities, I said. Coastal Management Solutions, Pacific Rim Consulting, Western Bridge Holdings. Do you want me to keep going, or is that enough? Derek went very still. And in that stillness I saw the thing that I had always suspected was underneath the ease and the confidence and the golf games and the handshakes. I saw the calculation, the rapid assessment of how much I knew and where it had come from and whether there was still a move available. You don't know what you're talking about, he said. I know exactly what I'm talking about, I said. I've known for 18 months. So has the SEC. I looked at my father, then back at Derek. The transfer agreement you signed tonight doesn't change anything about what's coming. You're taking the wheel of a car that's already going off a bridge, Derek. I'm sorry, I genuinely am. I wasn't lying about that last part. I had thought in the beginning that I might feel something satisfying when this moment arrived. I didn't. I felt the specific tiredness that comes at the end of something very long. Derek started to say something. A denial, I think, or maybe the beginning of an accusation toward me, the familiar reframing of his choices as something I had caused. But before he got there, his phone buzzed on the counter behind him. He picked it up, and I watched his face go through several stages, very quickly. The call was from his attorney. Derek had a defense attorney on retainer who he had consulted quietly 6 months earlier, which I knew because that attorney had also contacted my firm's general counsel in a fishing expedition to find out whether any reports had been filed. I knew about the call. I had prepared for it. Derek stepped out of the kitchen. I heard him in the hallway, his voice low and tight and stripped of all its usual ease. My father sat down at the kitchen table. He put his hands flat on the surface and looked at them for a long moment. How long have you known, he said, that Derek was stealing? About 18 months? No, he said. How long have you known that I would do this to you? I considered the question. I think I've known since the summer I turned 17, I said. I just spent about 10 years trying to be wrong about it. My father looked old in the kitchen light in a way I hadn't noticed before. He looked like a man who had made a very long series of decisions that had seemed reasonable in the moment and was only now beginning to count the cost of them. The parcels, he said. What do you want for them? I don't want anything for them, I said. I want to talk about a fair restructuring of the company's governance. I want an equity position that reflects my actual contribution to identifying the fraud that would have destroyed this company from the inside. I want it documented properly, and I want it done through counsel. I paused. And I want you to stop telling people I'm the one who didn't need things. He looked at me for a long moment. I held his gaze without difficulty. I had been practicing this without knowing it for my entire adult life. Okay, he said. It came out very quietly. Not defeated, exactly. Something more complicated than that. Something that might, over a long time, turn into something better. I nodded once. I picked up my glass and walked out of the kitchen back into the living room, where the party was beginning to shift in the way parties shift when the reason for them has quietly dissolved. Vanessa was looking at her phone with an expression that suggested she had received some information that was requiring rapid reassessment. The outside counsel attorneys were speaking to each other near the window in low tones. My mother was sitting on the sofa, looking confused and a little frightened. I sat down next to my mother. She looked at me the way she always looked at me when things were happening that she didn't fully understand, which was often. She put her hand over mine. "What's happening?" she said. "A correction," I told her. "Things are being sorted out." "Is Derek in trouble?" I thought about how to answer that honestly without being cruel. "Derek made some decisions that have consequences," I said. "The consequences are arriving." She was quiet for a moment. "You knew," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was something closer to wonder. "Yes," I said. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" "Because I needed to let the process work," I said. "And because I needed to make sure we would be protected when it did." She looked at me the way, I realized, she had never quite looked at me before, with the particular attention people give you when they have spent a long time not looking clearly and have just corrected their focus. Derek came back through the room without speaking to anyone. He went directly to the coat rack near the front door. Vanessa watched him from across the room, and I watched her decision happen in real time, the rapid calculation of a woman deciding whether to be beside a man or behind him, or very far away. She chose to follow him, which told me something about her I hadn't expected. Maybe she was more loyal than strategic, or maybe she was strategic enough to know that distance looks like guilt. They left without saying goodbye to my father. My father stood in the doorway of the kitchen for a long time watching the front door. Then he walked to where I was sitting, and he stood in front of me with the body language of a man who needed to say something and hadn't yet located the words for it. "I should have looked more carefully," he said. "At what?" He didn't specify. I didn't ask him to. "Yes," I said. "But we have time to do it better." He nodded. He sat down on the other side of my mother. For a while, the three of us sat there while the other guests quietly found their coats and said their polite goodbyes and slipped out into the evening, leaving the house with the particular silence of a place where something has just fundamentally changed. I stayed that night. My old bedroom was still my old bedroom, same furniture, same window facing the backyard. I sat on the edge of the bed and called Philip, my attorney, and gave him a brief summary of how the evening had gone. "The father took it well?" Philip said. "Better than I expected," I said. "He's not a bad man, he just had a very significant blind spot." "And the brother?" "Left with his attorney on speed dial and a company he can't actually operate," I said. "We'll see how the SEC timeline unfolds. The parcels give you real leverage for the restructuring conversation," Philip said. "I know," I said. "I don't want to use them as a weapon. I want to use them as a table." There was a pause on the line. "That's a more generous read than most people would take. My father is 70 years old," I said. "He built something real. It got corrupted by someone he trusted too much. I don't want to burn what's left of it. I want to fix it." I heard Philip writing something. "I'll draft a preliminary restructuring proposal," he said. "Equity position, governance rights, board seat if you want one." "I want one," I said. "I've earned it." After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a while and thought about the 17-year-old version of me who had stood in this same room and felt the particular loneliness of being invisible to the people who were supposed to see her best. That girl had worked 3 jobs and kept every receipt and learned every rule and built something out of the anger of being overlooked, and she had been right to do every single part of it. The work was always going to be its own reward. I had known that for a long time, but it was different sitting in that room, to feel that the work had also been its own protection. In the morning, I came downstairs to find my father at the kitchen table with a pot of coffee and a yellow legal pad. He had been writing. When I sat down across from him, he pushed the pad toward me without speaking. It was a list of questions about the company's Eastern Corridor projects, written in the careful hand of a man trying to understand what happened in his own house. I poured a cup of coffee. I picked up a pen. "Let's start at the beginning," I said. We sat there for 4 hours. I walked him through everything I had found, step by step, in the careful way I explain things at work when I need someone to truly understand rather than simply hear. He asked good questions. He had always been intelligent. He had just applied that intelligence selectively in the way people do when they love someone and don't want to see clearly. At one point, he stopped writing and looked at me. "You're very good at this," he said. He said it the way you say something when you are realizing it for the first time, even though it has been true for years. "I know," I said. He almost smiled. Not the warm, unguarded smile he kept for Derek, something more careful, more honest, the beginning of a different kind of seeing. I drove back to Dallas that afternoon. The highway was clear and flat, and the sky was the particular shade of blue that only happens over Oklahoma in October, bright and cold and unambiguous. I had my phone on the passenger seat and I didn't look at it. I didn't need to. There was nothing coming that I wasn't prepared for. The SEC would complete their case in their own time. Derek would have his process and his counsel, and whatever outcome that process produced, my father would sit with what he had learned and decide what kind of man he wanted to be on the other side of it. None of that was mine to control. What was mine was the company I had helped save. The position I had protected with 18 months of silence and strategic patience. The equity I would document properly and hold in my own name without apology. What was mine was the knowledge that I had done it correctly, not out of rage, not out of the need to be seen doing it, out of the quiet, persistent understanding that competence is the most reliable form of power, and that the people who underestimate it consistently are always, in the end, surprised by the result. I had known who I was since I was 17 years old. I had just spent the last 12 years waiting for the right moment to show everyone else. The moment had arrived. I had not spilled a single drop of my coffee.